Moving on from the cultural vibrancy of the 19th century in Bengal to the early 20th century, we find that this was a period which saw a search for a new visual language that would deny the tyranny of Western academic realism and would result in evolving a style that would bear the authenticity of Indianness. This was also the time when the Neo Bengal movement or a Bengal art movement came into being, pioneered by a radical theorist, poet, and a visionary, Abanindranath Tagore. Abanindranath Tagore emerged on the modern Indian art scene at the turn of the century as a perfect foil to Ravi Verma. Why was he considered a perfect foil? Ravi Verma, however, lost his popularity in the beginning decades of the 20th century. His art was not considered to be a nationalist art, and it was not considered a nationalist art for a reason. He had made use of oil medium rather, and had used academic realism, though he did paint themes that were derived from Sanskrit literature and poetry, epics, and mythologies, gave us the image of an Indian woman draped in a sari and laden with jewelry. But his images of the Indian feminine forms were considered to be very sensuous. Abanindranath Tagore was in a quest for an artistic medium that would be very much personal. And it is this quest for a search for an artistic idiom was the very foundation of his modernity. He was a scion of the Tagore family, nephew of Rabindranath Tagore, born at the palatial manor of Jorshamko, where he grew up. His early education in art was at home, tutored by English and Italian teachers. When we scrutinize his sketchbooks, we find that there is an array of themes he has represented or rather painted. These consisted of still life, landscapes, anatomy studies, classical antique sculptures, as well as portraits in pastels. He returned to pastels later on in his career. A study of all these forms shows the brilliance by which he mastered the academic realism. But at the same time, he was not too happy. There was discontent and frustration within him that he wanted a style which would be autonomous and a non-Western style. In this respect of his search, he came across two important miniatures. One was an Irish illuminated manuscript that was gilded, had decorative frames and ornate calligraphy. He also came across miniatures of the 19th century which belonged to the Delhi Kalam. And here also he found that there was one common factor between the two sets of miniatures or illuminations, and that was the splendor of intricacy of design and the high quality of craftsmanship, which really made a deep impact on the sensibility of Abanindranath Tagore. And he started painting in this stylized Indian miniature style and incorporated decorative qualities of design, calligraphy, etc. Later on, he had an opportunity of broadening his experience and encounter with the same miniatures when he came across Pahari miniatures and Mughal miniatures. Mughal miniatures was a result of an encounter and study under the reformist teacher E.B. Havel at the College of Arts and Crafts, Calcutta College of Arts and Crafts, where he studied at the art gallery there. Here at the art gallery were also the European form of paintings and many other manuscripts. And he seems to have amalgamated all of these influences. And he created, at the end of it, a figurative imagery that was fragile, mannered, had decorative patterning of foliage, costumes, and also used curved lines to represent drapery, but all of these in very soft and subdued tones. Abanindranath Tagore hence, created a very naive blend of this realism, naturalism, together with the decorative quality. And he created a number of works which finally led to his most important early work in a very Indian stylized miniature style, and this work was known as Abhisharika. Abhisharika is a motif that comes from Pahari miniatures, and it was a symbol of Vaishnava allegory of the divine love of Radha and Krishna. But more than representing the allegory of Vaishnavism, it was a direct invocation to the nostalgia of Kalidasa's Ritu Samhara, particularly during the monsoons. And that is how Abanindranath Tagore represented Abhisarika, a young girl in love who braves the dark night and the impending thunderstorm, and she goes through the forest to meet her lover. Now, this imagery of Abhisarika, which Abanindranath Tagore evolved, seemed to have become a stereotypical representation that was adopted by many of his followers later on. Abanindranath Tagore was poised as a nationalist artist, as the most representative of the nationalist artist, centered on the artworks that he created, which had a truly an Indian style of representation. And this was because of nationalism in league with Orientalism, led to a new ideology in Indian art with its aesthetics, self-definition, and search for tradition. So all of these were basically at the root of Orientalism. Now, at the turn of the century, that is in the beginning years of the 20th century, we find that Ananda Kumar Swamy as well as E.B. Havell, they emerge as spokesperson for the Indian defense against Western bias of Indian art as it was seen by the Europeans. So, and during this swirl of activity which was happening around this time, particularly Swadeshi movement, which was the result of Lord Curzon's idea of dividing the Bengal in 1905. So there was a lot of political turmoil, there was a lot of activity, and it was at this time Sister Nivedita proclaimed that arts, like science, like industries, like trade itself, should be in the hands or should be in the making of Mother India and nothing else. Now these were all the Orientalist ideas, where the ideas were centered on creating a style that would be authentically Indian and would marginalize anything that was Western, namely the use of oil painting and especially the use of academic realism. Now, Abanindranath Tagore was a cultural nationalist more than a political one. And as a cultural nationalist, that is how he evolved Indian style of paintings, where he had amalgamated influences that he was inspired from miniatures, as well as from Irish manuscripts, European form of painting, particularly pre-Raphaelites and Art Nouveau. And he had created his own style. This style somehow was very individualized, and it was considered to be distinct and very much Indian in its outlook. And in doing so, not that his style reflected any of the past Indian traditions. As a matter of fact, it was so subtly manifested, it was so beautifully assimilated by Abanindranath Tagore that it never felt that he was copying or imitating or simulating any of the past Indian visual traditions. As a matter of fact, he created these kind of works, and in spite of creating these kind of works, he never marginalized the spatial depth in his paintings, which he used in a very clever and in a very astute manner. Abanindranath Tagore's influence of the Mughal paintings led him to create an entire Mughal series, which ultimately won him a silver medal at the Curzon's Darbar Hall exhibition in Delhi in 1902. It was written, E.B. Havel wrote about it in a very eulogizing manner in the newspaper The Modern Review, and Abanindranath Tagore finally became the most representative artist of the Swadeshi, or rather the nationalist art, because he created a style that was very much Indian in character. Of this Mughal series that he painted, one was the construction of the Taj, the passing of Shah Jahan, or Shah Jahan dreaming of the Taj. The most seminal example which really establishes Abanindranath Tagore's approach to painting, particularly making it authentically Indian. It's a painting which is an oil on wood, and he has given, it shows the passing of Shah Jahan. So it shows the interior, it represents the interior of the Agra fort, where he has brought in this decorative touches which he was so much inspired by, especially in the pietra dura inlay of the marble, which can be seen in the pillars, etc. And there are typical other architectural features which are very much Mughal in character. Shah Jahan is shown lying on the bed, and his head is turned towards the Taj Mahal, in a sense of nostalgia, of memory, and of his last moments on this earth. And at the foot of the bed was the representation of his daughter Jahan Ara.